It might be afternoon, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone around the world. So I'm excited to see some folks that I recognize that's from the other continents too. So thank you for coming to this session today. So we are first of all, we would like to acknowledge the sponsor for our STEP event by Takeda, as you can see from the slide. So my name is Kayla Lin, and I'm the moderator for today's event for the panel discussion. So for today, we're actually looking at the panel discussion on career guidance. And first of all, I would like to make sure that you guys have downloaded the app and have the app ready in order to access to the STEP welcome and coffee chat later on as well. We will be doing some interactive poll sessions so that you can get engaged as well with us on the panel discussion. But for today, we would like to talk about the effective communication styles across career stages and why this is so important. And the reason why we have this panel discussion today was because from anyone who's who are a student on the line right now, or if you're a trainee, or even if you are a early stage career working folks, professional, or even if you're a senior professional, you need to learn to interact effectively across different career stages and with each other. And particularly, we need to also understand how to communicate with different folks as well. So we tackle problem differently with our age group, or even not just age group, but also where we are in our career path and where our background comes from. And this kind of brings us to this panel discussion, and this is why we also brought together the following panelists together specifically for the reason as well. So in particular, we're going to introduce our three panelists. And the main reason for this panel discussion today is not only just to have to learn how to communicate with each other or from the early stage, but also from senior level, it will benefit as well to talk to the early stage career folks. So with that in mind, our three speakers comes from different backgrounds, clinical, PharmD, or even PhD, all of them. And they either work in academia, hospital setting with the clinical settings, or in industry, as well as some backgrounds with the regulatory as well. So first up, I would then like to hand it over to Natella, Dr. Natella Rachmanina, and she will introduce herself now.
Sure. Thank you very much, Kayla, and thank you for those attending the session. I think it's a very important dialogue. Just briefly about myself, I was born and raised in Russia, previously Soviet Union, and I came to the United States as a postgraduate in 1991. And then I obtained MD degree, obviously, where I was trained in Russia. We go to medical school quite younger. But then after coming to US and working in postgraduate program for 2 years, I got certified and has launched my career as a clinical person here and clinical researcher, and did residency in the United States. I also did a residency partially in the Netherlands. I obtained my PhD degree in clinical pharmacology in Erasmus University in the Netherlands. And the reason to do partial residency was the regulatory countries not accepting trainings in other countries and requiring repeat at least 1 year. And my pediatric residency training as a result has been across 3 borders. Overall, in my professional highlights, I'm professor of pediatrics with tenure at the George Washington University School of Medicine here in Washington, D.C., and I run the pediatric and adolescent HIV services at Children's National Hospital. I also work part-time as a senior technical advisor at the Elizabeth Leger Pediatric AIDS Foundation and have projects in sub-Saharan Africa, currently in 10 countries. And I do chair a committee on pediatric AIDS at the American Academy of Pediatrics and work with multiple global bodies as well. And just fun facts, to make it more personable for us to go through the session. I love languages. I always took them quite easy. I speak quite few and even learned an artificial language, Esperanto, one day. It just took me 2 weeks to master. So for those of you interested, please do read about that. And I love to travel, dance, and cook. Back to you, Kayla.
Thank you, Natella. So next up, we have Matthew Dufay.
So hi, I'm Matthew Dufek. I'm currently at AbbVie as not a clinical pharmacologist in the clinical pharmacology department anymore, but I was born in Minneapolis and completed my undergraduates there locally in the University of Minnesota in the Twin Cities campus. After my bachelor's degree, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, but I was fortunate enough to have done some volunteer work inside of a local hospital there. So I worked doing a nicotine vaccine preclinical development and characterization for about 5 years before I went on to my PhD at the University of North Carolina. I studied under Darren Thacker at the UNC Chapel Hill and finished up, I guess, in about 2011, I believe it was. So it seems like it was just yesterday, but I guess that's almost a decade ago. And then I went on to work at Genentech for a few years in the Department of Clinical Pharmacology, supporting their small molecule oncology development programs that was recently initiated there shortly after I joined. I was there for about 3 years and then just decided I wanted to get back to the Midwest. So I joined AbbVie in 2014, wanting to, Chicago's as close as I could get to Minneapolis. So I figured that was a good transition. Served as an associate director in the Department of Clinical Pharmacology until last winter, where I took on a new position outside of clinical pharmacology as a therapeutic area head for clinical development in our Development Design Center, which is AbbVie's version of clinical development innovation and kind of pushing the future development programs. So it's been a kind of a fun, different career trajectory for me beyond my clinical pharmacology training. I've been really active in ACCP over the last few years, and some fun facts about me. When I'm not at work, which is probably 80% of my day, I love to do anything I can outdoors. If it's surfing, going out on the boat with our kids, snowboarding, skiing, anything I can do to go have some adventure. So.
Thank you, Matthew. Alex, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Alex Prokopienko. I was born and raised in upstate central New York on a dairy farm, actually, one of 6 kids. And I went to pharmacy school at Albany College of Pharmacy in Albany, New York. I was the closest pharmacy school to my home, and I was thinking I was going to be a pharmacist in our local community pharmacy. Things changed when I was in pharmacy school. I had a lot of clinical research experiences and decided that I wanted to go on for a PhD. And so I joined Tom Nolan's lab at the University of Pittsburgh and spent 5 years there doing several different projects, all focused in the clinical pharmacology aspects. And I thought initially when I was doing my PhD, I was going into academia and I was going to start my own research lab. And again, things changed. No straight path in anyone's career. So I actually switched gears towards the end of my PhD and decided to go into industry. So some of the accomplishments or highlights that I was most proud of during my PhD, I had a TL1 postdoctoral NIH fellowship, an AFPE fellowship, the American College of Clinical Pharmacology. I had a top poster award and podium presentation. So an alumni of that distinction, and we'll hear more from the podium presentations for this year. I'm excited for that. And I also received American College of Clinical Pharmacy Futures Grant Award. And I am the incoming co-chair of the ACCP Student Trainee and Early Stage Professional Committee. I'm currently working at Vertex Pharmaceuticals, and I've been there for just over a year now. So on this panel, I proudly represent the millennial generation, and happy to take any heat or any positive reinforcement for millennials. And then some fun facts. As you see here, this is a recent picture. We have a 5-month-old baby and a 2.5-year-old at home. So a lot of time spent with family, and still trying to remember all my hobbies that I had before grad school. So and picking up new hobbies too. Thank you, Kayla.
Thank you, Alex. So I would like to thank all three panelists in advance first for willing to talk for this panel discussion, and to move on to the next section for everyone. So as we mentioned earlier, this panel discussion, we would like to take it a little differently, where we want it more interactive because of how this year it's a little different where we're doing it virtually. So I would like you and I and all of us around here in this on this video call right now to kind of participate in case studies. So what we are going to do based on the time, we actually have prepared some case study where we have examples, for example, like the one shown on the slides right now, where you could actually have the questions asked and you can answer it in the ACCP 365 app as well.
Has joined the meeting.
So with that being said, I would like to go through, and then once we have that poll results comes in, we will have the different panelists to discuss as well. And throughout the whole time during this session, please feel free to ask also any questions that you may have that we might not have addressed and you're interested to ask in the chat box as well. So without further ado, the first one would be the case study where Judy was actually assigned to an academia mentor who was in mid-career and actively seeking funding and academic growth herself. So every time they met, he only talks about his research, and when Judy tries to share her ideas or progress, he seems to be less interested. He asked Judy to lead the write-up of 2 papers, but when they started finalizing them, he placed his name as a first author. Judy decided to discuss it with him. He tells Judy to relax and says that she still has many years ahead in her career, while he needs to go for promotion in a year and needs more publication. Next slide, please. So in this position, what would you do in Judy's situation? 1, agree with her mentor and let the situation go to avoid any conflicts. Or 2, voice her disagreement, but let the situation go. Or 3, voice a disagreement and suggest to split first author between the 2 papers. Or 4, agree but still decides to approach the HR or upper management. So if you can log in right now to the ACCP poll 365 app. So those are the 4 choices that you have. We'll give everyone in this session a couple of minutes before we moved on with the results. I see from the chat that you're having a hard time getting to the poll. So for anyone, you can log on to the ACCP 365 app, and once you're in it, you should be able to see. Let me just show really quickly. So you should log in, and then you click events, and you're able to click on the left-hand side, like that should be a great, like a 3-line dashboard, and then you should be able to click on events itself, click on 2020 ACCP annual meeting, and then click on sessions. So once you're into the 2020 annual meeting session, click on the step welcome and coffee chat. Then you are able to click on the calendar icon in the upper right corner and then look at session poll under the title and date. Yep. All right. So I see the poll are coming in. We'll still wait for a couple of minutes for everyone because I know that this is the first one, so folks might be trying to get used to the app and getting to the poll itself. So we will wait for maybe a minute more.
Yeah, this is Natella. I just want to make sure people are not voting yet on the second question because I see it's being filled as well. That's the second scenario.
Thank you. So if you can just answer the first question, that would be under the what would you do in Judy's situation. So the question back, the situation is once again, she has a mentor and she has 2 papers basically. And the mentor is very interested in his own career development and career promotion, and wanted to put himself as the first author, even though Judy might have worked with him on the papers. So what would you do in Judy's situation? And the 4 choices are to agree with the mentor and let the situation go to avoid any conflict, voice a disagreement, but let the situation go, or you could voice the disagreement, but then suggest to split the first author between the 2 papers. Or the last one is to agree with what the mentor was saying, but still go ahead and approach the HR or upper management. All right, so I think in the interest of time, we'll go through the answers. So we actually have a very, among all the 4 choices, we actually have like interesting results from that too. Wouldn't you guys agree? Like the panelists? So you see almost 92.8, well, almost everybody is agreeing to voice a disagreement and suggest to split the author between the 2 papers. So would you like to, so maybe we can hand this over to Nutella. Do you want to talk about this?
Yes, thank you very much. And I do think it's an interesting poll because I think it also shows that this situation is making you think way beyond the papers. So if you go back, I mean, what I think to me stands out here, papers seem to me to be a little bit tip of the iceberg. But there are a couple of other things that are more concerning, is that focus of attention on the mentorship and the growth of career of this young junior professional. We do hear 2 signals here that he seems to be really focused on his promotion. And while this might be a temporary issue, and we can expect that this will resolve over the promotion, but nevertheless, when you take somebody to mentor, you take obligations to promote their career. It doesn't mean that you will get your own career, which you still have your own obligations to, but you do take obligations to promote the career. So to me, it's not only about the papers, the case, but way above it, because papers seem to be a reflection of some trajectory that has taken place. And I think personally that for Judy, it is time to stop and think much bigger than those 2 papers. I think it's time to stop and think whether this mentorship is working for her career and for her career development. And I think agreeing with the mentor, making situation to avoid conflicts is a very logical answer from junior professionals. You don't want to spoil your trajectory with your mentor. You are thinking, okay, there's 2 papers and not that, but I will do more. We can just continue. But again, to me, what I would really look is the second thing I would like to say is that usually at the beginning of any paper write-up, and that's a culture that I have learned only probably in the midst of my career, and I wish somebody talked to me earlier on. Usually we are not taught to really negotiate the authorship rights or the expectations of your plus expectations of your role in this paper. This is something that you learn to do as you step over different career stages. But the fact that Judy started doing this work and carries the bulk of the write-up and now is asked to be moved from the position of the first author tells me that they have not been even coaching or discussion of the proper process of approaching any paper, where paper decide on the roles in the paper and they decide on the authorship quite in the beginning. Sometimes some of those decisions do get shifted when there is somebody's commitment or somebody's contribution has become much more significant, somebody's commitment dwindled away or changed. But in general, it is a very good rule of thumb. As the paper starts being discussed and drafted and decision is made to move it forward, to make those agreements. So on the paper end, I think I would not personally have voted in totally avoiding conflict situation. I would have raised the discussion with mentor and would have said that while I have my whole career ahead of me, those are 2 papers where I invested a strong amount of time and commitment, and I feel I deserve to be considered as a first author, probably on at least one of them. That would be definitely. But I think for me on the bigger scale, that prompts a consideration that this mentor-mentorship relation works. Give me 1 second. And this is something that I think the culture that this session I'd like to share is that I do think it is very important that going forward, people understand that mentorship and mentee relationship, while I don't want to be too formal, I'm not the administrator or the bureaucrat and everything, but I think setting up expectation of this relationship is very, very important. And I think going forward, we wouldn't be dealing with it if there was a clear situation that Judy said early on in her relationship with her mentor, saying, this is what I expect, this is what I want of this relationship, this is what I expect will happen. And equally, a mentor would ask himself and have that session. I have found it to be very, very useful to sit with my mentees for one of the first encounters and ask them, what do you see? What is our relationship will bring you? And sometimes they don't have an answer. They just might be very junior, or they just step in the field where I work in. And then we will sit to work together, and I will bring some examples of what I considered at this stage of career my targets. So I do think that here, to me, on those choices, I probably would not have gone with the choices 1 and 2. I definitely would have considered choice 3. Regarding the choice 4, this is HR and upper management. Many of us avoid, and I will speak as a female panelist. I think it's very also typical of women in academic and professional career. We tend to be more questioning, should we go complain, should we just accept it? Equally as with the salaries, as you guys know, there is a big gap usually across many professional fields still exists between female and male, just because of different negotiation skill and approach to that. And I do know that people usually avoid HR and upper management, but if there was an alternative senior person in the faculty tier with whom I have had relationship that I can trust, I probably would have not gone to HR or upper management, but I would have gone to somebody senior in the mentorship chain, and I would have approached them with just a conversation of advice. And my question would be, how do I manage this relationship going forward? This papers is just one episode, but there will be more projects. And I don't feel my career matters to my mentor. And I don't feel it will, and I'm worried that it won't matter even after he reaches his milestone of the promotion. And in the meanwhile, while it is going to his milestone of promotion, I seem to be losing. And at least have maybe a guiding conversation of how could I potentially solve that. So my choice would have been with number 3. I will let other panelists speak, but I also would consider involving either having the conversation with the mentor himself, rather not over the paper disagreement, but setting up those expectations, or if not sure about that step yet, at least would have talked to another more senior professional seeking advice. This is my initial approach, Kayla. I wonder what other panelists will say.
Yeah, I would add to that people don't always think about how important publication is or isn't, and it kind of depends on your position. If you're in academia, a government position, or an industry, I know from the industry perspective, there are companies that your potential to move up in the organization or get a promotion is directly tied to how many first author or senior author publications you get. Anything in the middle doesn't really count towards that, but it depends on, why do you need the publication? What's the importance to it? And the other thing that people don't, and Natalia kind of pointed on there, is you need to kind of pre-negotiate what your role in a publication would be. There's an expectation that, at least from our side, that there's strict rules on who can be first author, who can be senior author, and who can even be included in as an author on a paper. If you're a new employee to the organization and you have a mentor and you've only been, say, working there for 5 months and you weren't necessarily involved in the study to begin with, but you're just writing it, that doesn't always constitute the need to be the primary author. We often have medical writers within industry that will write up publications for us and help us along the way. Although they wrote the entire publication, they didn't contribute to the primary scientific research, the development of ideas, of conclusions. They were just writing it. So it really depends on the situation, on how involved you are personally in scientific merit of that publication, writing it up, and the contributions to it. But I agree with Nutella that you need to kind of pre-negotiate those things ahead of time, so there's very clear on everybody's approach on who's going to be taking care of what your contribution is, and what the acknowledgement could be. If it's an author, if it's a primary author, what that really is entailing and why. The more clear you are with your manager or your mentor on those expectations and what it'll be like for the relationship, the better it'll be for you. Going to upper management or HR should only be like a nuclear option. That just kind of proves the fact that you're not able to deal with these type of situations in a constructive manner. That should only be reserved for a situation that just is not controllable, such as if somebody wants to add somebody as an author on a paper that had no involvement in the study. We've actually ran into that multiple times, and we've ran into situations where you have the vice presidents or very, very high up in the organization, and sometimes even legal involved in those situations. But if it's just an authorship, between who should be first, second author, you should be able to have those conversations with your mentor to figure those out the best you can.
So from a millennial perspective, for the sake of controversy a little bit too, I think that I would choose some variation of option 4, and the variation and why would be, I think that it's important in your career, whether you're starting as a PhD student, you should have your committee, and have a committee that is there to protect you from these difficult situations. And that's kind of the role of the committee members, is sometimes they might need to step in to help out and support you. I think this carries over too in a professional career, where you kind of have a board of directors for your career, where you have different mentors that have different skill sets and will build your network and be not only mentors, but also sponsors for you. So in this situation, if this is going on, I think that she's already talked directly with her direct manager, and it doesn't seem like there's going to be any flexibility. I don't even think that option 3 would necessarily go over well. And in that case, I think you would maybe need not necessarily to go up to upper management, but maybe across, and have some support from other leaders, either like within your company or within the academic institution, that would mentor and sponsor, and get their feedback too, to see if this situation, if she's reading it correctly, and if the case is that the authorship needs to change, I think that your board of directors or your PhD committee would stand up for you. I think that's important, and I think that's probably the millennial in me, that we all need support, and we're looking for that support at all times. So I think that's really my perspective on it. And I also agree that this could have been avoided by predefining what the expectations are. And so like active ways to do that would be have an individual development plan. You can do that in your academic career. You can do that in your professional career. In your annual goals, set some of the publications as annual goals. So then you can tie it back when you're seeking for authorship. You can say, this is part of my goals. We had discussed this, and you can leverage that. So those were just kind of some thoughts that I had on that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all of you for the first question. And I think in general, like if I could really just see as from all of you three, we kind of see the same. You might have a slightly different approach from your experience, and also from where you're coming from, either from like clinical, from like standing from the PhD point of view, or even as like what Matthew was saying, the industry perspective. But I think the consensus or like the main idea, I think, coming from all three panelists, if everyone could see it, is that you actually have to make sure to set the expectation or even to pre-negotiate. I think the main goal is to have the so-called difficult discussion or conversation early on before embarking into this. So pre-communication is really important in this perspective. And so with the interest of time, I think it would be good if we can go on to the second question. And like I said earlier, if you have any more questions to follow up or any other question that we did not cover during the case study, we would have at the end of the session to kind of have a Q&A session. So feel free to talk on the chat box to post your questions there. So for the second question, case study, Ben is working in a team environment and having 2 or 3 different people that each has specific recommendations on the best approach to go forward for a project or study. It could be regulatory with a suggestion versus clinical pharmacology, or even versus a team leader. So each person's try to prioritize his approach or her approach. And Ben is very puzzled trying to decide the best way forward. So in this situation, the poll question is, what should Ben do to balance different approaches to move project forward? The first part is 1, try to incorporate everyone's approach and submit it. Or 2, ignores everyone's approach and go with his own so that he is not playing any favoritism. Or 3, prioritize the critical question for the project and work with team to see which approach helps to answer the best to move the project forward. Or the last one, which is invite a senior management to the next meeting and brainstorm together with the team on best way moving forward. And so with that, I think the poll on the ACCP 365 app is open, and you could answer question, that would be answer question 2. What should Ben do to balance different approaches to move project forward? So we are
looking at question 3 on the screen, at least on our screen. It's a question 2. Okay, good. Sorry, it slided. Oh.
Yep. So we'll wait for a couple more minutes, maybe a minute or so. So just in case if you didn't if you're just joining us, the question for case study 2, with what Ben should do to balance different approaches to move the project forward. So the case study, actually, just in summary, is basically talking about Ben working in a team environment, have the 2 or 3 different people with different opinion on how to move the project forward. So Ben is very puzzled and is trying to decide what will be the best way to move forward, to move the project forward.
Guys, I'm having a big problem here because I think I'm not the only one that do that. In the last question, I answered and I submit in the end of the pool. So I'm not able to see the pool again because it says already completed.
Okay. So when you're on the app, when you chose under the...
Yes, I answered the first question and then I click submit. But I didn't answer the other questions. So I'm not being able to see the pool again because it says already completed. I believe some others make the same mistake, I think.
Kayla, may I suggest then, if we're having this clinical glitch since we are run on time, is that could people just chat the number of the question they choose? 1, 2, 3, 4. Just quickly chat just the number. It shouldn't take that much time from you. At least we'll get an idea where you are.
You can, if you are unable to use the app to pull the answer up, it would be. I agree, Natalia. Thanks for the recommendation. So yeah. On the chat box, if you could just quickly type 1, 2, 3, or 4.
Yeah, Kayla, this one is very consistently 3.
Okay. So I think in the interest of time, I could see also from the chat box that most people are choosing the answer 3, sorry. That's 1 or 2 with 4. So, okay. So, Matthew, would you like to take the lead on this question?
Yeah, I think people kind of got this idea with this one is that, you know, if you're working on a cross-functional team, that happens. That's pretty much how everybody works nowadays. Is it's not just one person working in isolation off by themselves. There's lots of people working together with different viewpoints, and you're always going to run into these type of situations where each function or each person has a different viewpoint on what their best step forward would be. And that could be just based on their background, but also, you know, if you're looking at a different perspective for this example, a clinical pharmacology's perspective versus regulatory, those can be very different perspectives based on what their prioritization and whether one department is really conservative and other one's really innovative and trying to push boundaries for not only this specific project, but for like a future overall, you know, how we do work in the industry or even academia. And so I think the right answer is never going to be one person's. It's got to be somewhere in the middle, and you really need to utilize the resources that you have at the team level. If you have a project leader or a project manager, their job is to really identify what the critical question is and make that as clear as possible to everybody in the team. And if you have different infighting or, you know, heated conversations, that's normal. I wouldn't be shy away from that. That's the whole point of working within a team, and you can have constructive arguments. That does exist. But, you know, being flexible and say, okay, I understand where you're coming from, and saying, really putting yourself in the other person's seat so you can say, okay, maybe I don't need to be this inflexible in my viewpoint, but that way you can kind of move somewhere towards the middle to what's best for the team or the project. That should be the prioritization of everybody on the team. It shouldn't be I have to win. That is not the point of working on a team, and that's not how we're going to be successful in trying to bring medicines to patients. You need to be innovative. You need to push boundaries, yes, but you also have to work as a team. That's what a high functioning team is. So I think the better you can kind of get over, I need to win and I need to be right, and work as a group and try to find that middle ground to address the critical question, the more successful you're going to be inside your career. And that's not an easy conversation to have. It's often very, very uncomfortable. You feel like it's a personal attack if somebody doesn't believe your viewpoint is correct. Yeah, you might be 100% right, but that doesn't mean that that's the right step for the organization or the team. So I think you need to really take a step back and understand everything and kind of see it from, you know, I always had a mentor back in the day that said, people get so focused on the tree they can't see the forest. And so you got to step back and understand where everybody's coming from so you can see where are we going in this project. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. Alex or Natalia, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I can kind of flip this question around a little bit too. So I feel sometimes that this option number 4, you might not, and this is coming from early stage career, you might not invite your senior management to the meeting, but they might invite themselves and might not give you the responsibility to be the representative on that team. How would you, and so this question would be for Matthew and Natalia, how would you manage that coming from early stage if you find that your senior management is, you know, coming to these meetings and kind of taking your voice away?
I think that's pretty normal, right? I mean, Alex, so you said you're about 18 months, 2 years in. I know within the organizations that I've worked in, I was obviously in that place a long time ago, but the first few years that I worked on a project team, I almost never went to an important meeting by myself. There was always somebody there to help, because you physically don't know things that you don't know. And so having their input is a really critical part of learning, and learning from what they know, and they're seeing things in a different way. And so I've had people that have worked for me there that they got angry. It's like, why did you say that? I didn't believe that. I was like, I know that I know you had a viewpoint on this, but it didn't fit with what the overall organization needed, because you don't understand some of the infightings that are going, or collaborations that we have going, or what the bigger picture is, just because you're earlier in your career. And it's not a bad thing, but you say, okay, I get it. And then you can learn from that environment. I've been stepped on multiple times by vice presidents at governance meetings. So it's a super uncomfortable position, and I absolutely hate it. I felt like I failed, but you need to flip it around on yourself to say, okay, that's not something I thought of. I can learn from the situation, and now I know something that I didn't know before, and I really learned from those. And that's kind of the point of your first couple of years of your career, because there's no such thing as a training program out there for clinical pharmacology if that's the industry that you're going to work in. We take people from all over these different, very diverse backgrounds, and they say, okay, now go work on a clinical trial. It's like, I've never done this before. So you have to learn these things on a day-to-day basis. And I think those type of conversations, they're horrible to have, but that's how you grow, honestly.
I was speaking from a friend.
Well, I will just add to good points that Matt and Alexander raised, that I think that there are a couple of points that you made, Matt, which I wanted to elaborate a little bit more. First, do not take it personally. I do think it is important, at least in my trajectory, to have learned to be humble, at the same time respecting people's knowledge, but also to defend your ownership of the project. And as Matthew pointed out, it will be harder to do in the junior stages of the career. But if you show strong commitment to the project, that is visible, and it is visible to leadership as well. And you need not to take it personally, because somebody will look at your face to me and say, that's absolutely absurd idea. Nobody will ever do this study. Like, okay, why? Explain to me why. Instead of going away hurt because I was deemed stupid, just turn away and say, can you explain to me why the study is not feasible? I'd like to hear that explanation. Sometimes, in my experience, even in the most abrasive comment, this kind of humble approach where you stay calm and you just turn and say, could you please walk me through step by step so I understand your argument? This helps. The other thing that I was going to say, to me is very important, is when everyone gives you an approach, if you look at these choices, keep it. Do not use all of it, because you will be prioritizing, and we all agree on the number 3. I have no objection. I would have done the same. But sometimes in the process of your prioritization, down the line, you will realize that somebody's comment, a point of view, or perspective actually starts kicking in and becomes your challenge in the project, or becomes your facilitator. So it is always to be very attentive, even if you are passionately driven by the project and believe that the comments or the suggestions that were made will impede its development. Do not discard them. My approach has been keep them somewhere, park them somewhere, have this idea, and you might never encounter it again throughout your project, but believe me, many times you will. And again, just make sure, because here is the for Ben is that he's leading the project. And I agree with Matt and Alexander, the chances of somebody senior stepping in to determine all the game and the political outcome of that project might not be his. It might not be his choice. But I think it's very important to stick up to 7. And even if senior person decides to lead it, I would still go in and say, I want to be working by your side. I want to be reminding to be one of the leaders of the project. Would you please keep me with you as you move this forward and retain your role? Don't let it just to be transitioned away.
Yeah, I would just add the one thing I've noticed lately, and I don't know that it's really a generational thing. I think it's just you finished your PhD and this is maybe your first job, that people nowadays are just more sensitive, that they feel that they should be the leader on a project to make all the decisions, even though that they're freshly out of graduate school, or maybe they came from a different company, but they don't know the history of a project one way or the other. I would caution people about feeling entitled that they should have something until they earn it. It does take a while to get your career going, and use those opportunities earlier in your career. You have more time to learn from everybody else around you than you will later in your career. As you have more responsibilities, use that time and really utilize everything you have to learn as much as you can during that period of time. You don't want to have the responsibility of having direct reports, and that it takes a completely different skill set and a ton of your time that you don't realize until you're doing it.
Yeah, and then with that being said, what if we turn the role, we reverse the role, and you have basically mentors that it's difficult to, like you said, Matthew, earlier, that at the early stage, we first come in, you always have a senior person going in with you to all the meetings, you're never alone. So in that perspective, as you go on the first few years of your career, or even in your PhD, that you have a mentor on the other hand that's not willing to let it go. So how would you approach it that way?
I've ran into that situation, and some people just won't let things go, and because they believe they're 100% right. Sometimes you're never going to agree, but the other thing you need to think about is you can flip it. It's like, okay, what if I can't agree with this person? If they feel that I helped them out, that can help you down your career as well, or even on the different projects. Like, I was able to compromise to some other functional area, and now you have a better relationship with that. So you can kind of flip it. It's like, what are you trying to get out of this? But you're going to run into situations that people just aren't willing to compromise one way or the other, and sometimes it's got to go higher, and sometimes, or even what I like to do with a lot of our junior people that come in is I recommend go get a couple of mentors, go talk to other people that have had similar situations, because you're not the first person that has ran into this problem. Especially like I've been fortunate enough to work at really large companies. We have the world's experts for everything that I ever have a question for. I just go to one of the senior directors, say, hey, I just want to chat. This is not like, I'm not complaining or anything. What do you think of this? And get 3 or 4 different ideas and bounce ideas off other people that aren't your direct manager. Therefore, you're not kind of throwing yourself under the bus per se, but you're just getting feedback on how you could deal with things better. Or maybe they'll bring up things like, oh, we had this problem 3 years ago. This is how we did it. And you'll kind of learn from those things as well.
Yeah. Alex and Natalia, do you have anything else to add on this?
I was reading an article today, a blog post about what one of the skills that you get from doing a PhD, and one of them is learning the art of dealing with difficult situations or difficult people, and kind of working through that. And I think it comes up in different ways at different times, but I think we all have that in our core, that we're able to, persevere and have the resilience to work through it, and just kind of keeping your eyes on the long-term goal. And kind of like what Matt was saying about, if you're too close to the trees, you can't see the forest, or the other analogy is if you're, looking at an elephant up close, you don't see the full elephant. So you're trying to figure out what's going on with it. So I think sometimes it's better to step back and, get more diverse perspectives. So I think that's great advice.
And on my end is to take a lead on things, even if the discussion is taking place with my advice. Can I go talk to this person? Who do you recommend I talk to more? This way you're involving people and advising you, but you're still maintaining your initiative. Can I take notes of this discussion? Do you mind I send a summary? You have gone somewhere and with your mentor without to somebody senior. You have talked, you have brought different perspectives. Can I send the notes? A great culture after each encounter to send some points. If you have talked to somebody, it can be a simple email with several bullet points saying, this is how I summarize this discussion. This is sometimes the best learning experience because people have discussed it with you. You can walk sometimes of discussion where you think you retained everything that was said there. But then when you start formalizing it or putting this in a few bullet points, you can realize that you might have missed a key point. And that's to me also, if you know, very technologically development generation, this is normal to you. And I think part of that sense of entitlement, somewhat from Matthew referred, it also comes from the culture. When we were young, if we liked the song, we had to save money, go to the shop, find the disc, wait for the disc release, buy the disc, bring it home and play that music. When you like the new song, what do? You click one thing on your phone and you listen to the song no matter where you are. So I do think that translates in a different expectation and the speed with which you expect the return on investment. And it's very different from our generation. And some of it just needs to be understood both by you, but also by us. Back to you, Kayla.
Yeah, and speaking of that, that kind of also like ties in with the next question that we kind of have, and that for Amir's, for example, like for this case study, like basically Amir's boss doesn't seem to be interested in career development or project, and every time Amir goes to her office, she is too busy to talk and tells you to come back later. Amir feels that he and his projects are definitely not a priority for him. And meanwhile, Amir also feels that his projects are falling behind and is missing like career opportunity. So it kind of like closely ties into what we were discussing earlier. And the question for this case study is to. So Krista, can I have the next slide? Thank you.
Yes, I'm sorry. Here we go.
Sorry, yeah. So how should Amir address this challenge? The first one is to schedule a one-to-one with his boss to discuss about this issue, to seek from higher management, or to keep quiet and try to learn
Has left the meeting.
while seeking help from other colleagues for projects, and four, discuss this issue with HR. So if you could try to do the poll again, or if it's easier for everyone, you could just type it in the chat as well, what your options is. For question number 3, if you're unable to answer it on the poll, feel free to post your answers in the chat, or you could privately put it on the chat to me as well.
Very consistent answers on this one as well, Kayla.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So most of the answer, as the answers are still coming in from like the chat. But for the interest of time, I think it's really good to have that discussion as well. Alex, do you want to take away? It seems like one is the number one favorite among everyone here.
Yeah, I think this situation comes up, throughout our careers sometimes, where we and this is maybe from a millennial perspective. We do have that sense of entitlement that we almost think that people should always be like, or our advisor should always have us first in mind. But the reality of the situation is that we're getting some feedback. Okay. And the reality of the situation is that everyone's busy throughout their career.
I actually think it's someone else who needs to mute themselves, please. So Dr. Prokopienko can speak.
Okay. So the reality is that whether it's your advisor, your boss, or mentor, everyone's extremely busy. And this applies across generations. That we have, hundreds of emails coming in a day. You have things that are always coming at you, and so really where the priority comes is that it's on the individual. So you have to be responsible for your own career. And so the idea of scheduling a one-on-one meeting, prioritizing time management, having blocks of time that you're setting aside, that you're discussing these issues. Otherwise, if you don't do that, time's going to go away quickly because there's so many competing demands. So I think that's a really great answer in this situation. And I think overall, I think it's probably more of a misunderstanding in this situation. It's, Amir is kind of interpreting it as the boss doesn't care about taking it too personal, where it's not a personal thing. It's a reality of our professional and personal lives, balancing it all out. So I think that's one thing as millennials, that we take things too personally sometimes. They're a little too sensitive, but that's the idea of kind of stepping back and kind of putting yourself in, in this case, Amir should put himself in his boss's shoes and kind of think about all of the competing demands that the boss has. And so trying to make that relationship as easy as possible for his boss is going to be, the best case scenario here, helping that relationship along.
Well, if I may chime in with Alexander, I am one of these busy bosses. Actually, I was reading She and feeling guilty. So, but I can travel across the sea, and then I think, and I'm very informal, but at the same time, had one conversation one day like this, and when we started talking, there was a lot of hurt feelings. But then I asked the person whether they ever felt that they couldn't reach to me in crisis, and it's a clinical world, so remember there are a lot of clinical questions popping in. And suddenly this person looked back and said, not really. And we looked back and looked his phone and saw that I even answered the text in the middle of the night from Africa when there is a big time difference. So there was suddenly that recognition that I am committed. It's just indeed my schedule is absolutely overwhelmed. We did find a solution. We put the recurrent meeting on the schedule right away before the meeting. And this is to me it helped me, it helped him to be reassured that I designated time. I will be dishonest to say we always kept this appointment. We shifted it around, but it was a commitment. So it was no longer that even if I'm asked to talk somewhere or to give a talk at a university or something like that, I had to shift and move somewhere in that week my schedule. I would write and we would communicate frequently through the text saying, listen, I can't make a job meeting today. How about Friday or another day? But that made a commitment that was necessary, for example, in my experience. And it was never meant to be, and I echo Alexander's point, is that it was never really meant to be. In my judgment, this mentee was very self-sufficient, very motivated, very driven, and knew what to do. And at some point, it felt like, okay, I gave him the bigger task, I see the bigger picture. And it's a balance between seeing the tree in the forest, because it's not always just that way, because I saw the forest. He needed help to see, I needed help to go down to look at the tree in this particular case. So I do think it is important to be honest with your mentorship and not to be a discussion like that, and not to be worried about saying, I need more assistance, I need more mentorship meetings with you. And I did chat one suggestion, and I just want to finish with it. I do think it's crucially important to make agenda for those meetings, because when you just meet for mentorship meeting to touch bases, it might be just one project, but you might be 2 papers behind. And if you do not put all of them, and even if you don't have detailed time to go over, but you keep a tab of what you want to discuss with your mentor, maybe you need additional time when you need to respond over email. But it is very important that you do agenda. And believe me, mentors will not develop this agenda usually. So this is something where I think mentees should take a great ownership. So this is my meeting. I need it for my career, and send the meeting agenda to your mentee ahead of time or right before as meeting starts. It's very helpful. It helps us to organize our time as well. Back to you, Kay.
Yeah, I think
I could.
go ahead.
Go ahead, Kayla.
No, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to add. I think it's kind of a mix of all that. It depends on the person, really. We've been seeing more lately that employees like to be awarded or rewarded or give positive feedback more and more often, whether that's a promotion or some sort of other, increase in your pay. But it seems like it's, if you kind of look at your organization, do people get promotions every 1 year, every 2 years, every 3 years? What's the normal cycle? If you see your colleagues around you that they primarily have been promoted every 2 years, but you're at year 3, maybe there's an issue with your communication with your boss, or maybe there's something else going on that you're not aware of. Maybe you haven't been performing as high as you feel you are. You need to kind of have that honest conversation with your manager. I've always been a firm believer that people don't work for companies, they work for their managers. And I see that play out almost every single day of my life, that people leave an organization because they're not happy with their promotion schedule, the projects that they're getting, or most importantly, probably not the relationship that they like with their direct manager. So I think it comes down to how do you build that relationship to the point that you want it to be, so that your manager has some version of a vested interest inside your career and the path that you're interested in. If you don't tell them that I would like to get to this point, they're probably not going to know that. They might take assumptions like, oh, they're content with where they're at. You need to be a little bit clearer nowadays than you probably were in the past. I know people always like to say, well, if I'm performing really awesome, everybody should notice. Well, to Alex's point, people are extremely busy. The amount of work that you do nowadays is probably exponentially higher than what we did inside industry and academia 10 years ago or 15 years ago. It never stops now. I mean, we get hundreds of emails. I saw my emails yesterday. I think it was 350 emails, 340, something like that emails yesterday. And that was supporting one therapeutic area. And it's just that it's very busy. You need to look out for yourself, but build that relationship with the people that are important for your career. And then the other thing that I've seen work really well, and we've been instituting with some people, is you might have a manager that's responsible for your career development, but maybe go seek out some other mentor within the organization. I mean, it doesn't have to be your department, but just within like your division or wherever you work, so that they can give you some constructive feedback on things that your boss isn't going to be able to see, that you're maybe aren't being as self-critical of yourself on things that you can improve on. And they'll help you kind of build that confidence in yourself to have those hard conversations with management or your manager to say, okay, this is where I want to be. And don't ever make the assumption just because you have a development plan that that's what's going to happen. I've seen more times than not that, because everybody wants to have things prescriptive that are like, this is what it's going to be, and we're going to work with HR, we're going to have this development plan, and if I box checks these 6 things, then I'm going to get a promotion. That it's not that easy. There's a lot of other things that go into your promotion, and it's not just you. Some departments have, we have a quota that we're only allowed to promote 6 people this year. Maybe we have cash influx problems that you're not aware of that because of your position. Those things play out for a senior manager that you'll never be aware of those conversations until you have been in your career for quite a while, or happen to have a really good relationship with somebody. That's why having that outside perspective can be really beneficial to you.
I just wanted to add here, from millennial perspective again, I think we're really comfortable with electronic communication. So messaging as quickly as possible, sending quick emails. I think one thing that I'm learning is that a lot of times emails, are read in the negative format. So even if you're sending a positive email, the person who's receiving it is reading it in a negative way, just because it's that you have that onslaught of, 350 emails in one day. You have another email coming through, so you're like, oh, what's this? You're already kind of annoyed maybe. So I think one thing that we're talking about here, and I'll just call it out, is having a conversation. So, going in person, having an in-person conversation, or, picking up the phone and having a conversation like that. Those are kind of like the analog ways of communicating, but I think they also convey a lot of the nonverbal communication that you need sometimes in a conversation, and then email will not get that across properly. So I think that's another point that I think is appropriate here. So even though it's difficult to go in person, especially if you're an introvert, which I'm on the introvert scale, it's harder. You have to prepare for it and kind of walk through those questions and what your answers would be. But you definitely just go in person. It's a lot more impactful.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. The impersonality of having a conversation by text or by email, nothing replaces looking at a person face to face in that 5-minute conversation. That's the biggest thing that we've struggled with as an organization is with this whole quarantine, everybody working remotely, is we've lost that personal touch. I could accomplish more with a 5-minute conversation of just dropping by a manager's office or a colleague's office and just chatting with them for 5 minutes than sending 30 or 40 emails back and forth. There's just a lot of value to talking with somebody, and if you're not comfortable, I hate talking. It might not seem that way, but it took me a lot of years to kind of get over being able to express myself in a confident way and be able to talk to somebody and have those really difficult, uncomfortable conversations. I might be sweating bullets inside and just like, oh my God, I can't believe I said that. But you have to be able to get over those things and kind of help yourself, train yourself. It's no different than a PhD. You have to train yourself to talk. It's not something we're just born with.
Just one more closing point on that to support Matt and Alexandra. I do think one advice is if situation particularly escalates, if you feel that there is stop the correspondence. It's because at some point in the email, we start losing the style and touch and people get flared up. At that point, just propose the meeting. And I have been mentoring a lot of young people who have come across some abrasive communications or the communication that they interpret hurtful, and they were almost ready to shoot out. And I always tell them the send button can be very dangerous. So before you click the send button, stop, ask yourself. It's almost like giving medicine in a hospital. When we're giving important medicine, it's never one person. You call second person to double check on the dosing, on the right patient, on EMR. So do this check, particularly if you feel that the situation is somewhat hurtful to you or you're not treated fairly. Stop, pause, look at what you're about to send out. And before you send this button, think maybe it's just better to write, could we have a conversation? And then even with the Zoom, I agree with Matthew, but I've been fortunate enough in my field to continue working through with the personal days. And I can tell the days when I'm in the hospital is so much better compared to a few days when I don't have the clinic. It's just today I'm talking from home because you do still see people, and it's a big element, and we are losing it right now. A lot of people talk about long-lasting effect of how we function, but even FaceTime with each other can be very useful. And if you haven't mastered yet, master Zoom or WebEx or any other platform, even for short checks, you have sometimes this opportunity to just say, can we get online for 5 minutes and send person the Zoom or other link, and just schedule this small period of time will help you to leverage communication. Sheila, back to you.
Yeah, those are really good case, and I think with the interest of time, I would like to open up the floor for questions and answer. There's one questions for the three panelists, for all three of you. So Casey asked the question of basically wanting to hear from each of you. What advice would you give from a communication standpoint that you would give to the next generation?
Let me start by saying I am the older generation. So what I think sometimes the new generation is not taught is to account of how the mentors are. They are used to certain know, and how you all study nowadays is so different from even the way we studied. And I think sometimes I feel we fail to prepare young people to understand the generational difference on the end. We are going through more and more understanding, trying to understand millennials. Many of us have children who are millennials, so you're learning through your child as he becomes a young adult, that the things are handled differently. But I think also, to me, an advice to younger generations to realize that the generation of your mentors might not have all the skills and might have a different style of communication than you do. And don't always accept that this is just something. I try to also because watching old movies sometimes. I did tell a couple of my mentees, I will send you a couple of suggestions for the weekend. Watch oldies, because that's how the world operated before. And we had a great deal of joking around that because they did take time. I watched them, and we had, it was a wonderful work side conversation, which allowed us to compare how differently we communicate with each other, including professional, but even in the non-professional domain is changed somewhat as well. And I think the other thing is always believe in yourself. That's to me a very big point. I think you need not to lose the self-motivation and believe in yourself. I do think millennials, while being externally quite assertive, sometimes really that sense of individualization is not always translated into the career path that is like, I'm holding this is in my hand, this is what I want to do. And maybe I'm talking from my experience. I always wanted to be a pediatrician, and I stayed and became a pediatrician with subspecialties in 3 different countries. And it wasn't always easy. And we don't touch even on the issue of racial and ethnic diversity and culture today, but that's a big element of the work culture as well. And I remember coming to the States after training in Russia and being moved on everything I did clinical in the residency, everything, because it was so much not in line what was here, but being able to pull through that. And I feel sometimes that the younger generation is more sensitive to it. I mean, not to say that I didn't have my sensitivity, but I was so raised up and you hide it within yourself and it's yours and you just keep going. And so maybe also aligning those expectations and being secure of yourself without being what many people will attribute narcissistic or self-driven, but having a true security that is based on your devotion to what you want to become or what you want to do. And you might not all know, I agree with Matthew, your career plan probably will change several times. Matthew's career path was a brilliant example. Alexander showed. I'm a stubborn Russian. I just can't be a pediatrician no matter where. But people do change completely the path, and it's totally normal. But just be prepared. But I think keeping this integrity will help. I'm passing back to the rest of the panel.
50% Ukrainian. I'm not Russian. So I think my biggest point. So I guess as a millennial, what would I tell Generation Z? I don't know. I think a lot of times we're starting, because of social media, starting to compare ourselves to others a lot more, because we have that constant influx of, what is everybody else doing and the fear of missing out. I think the biggest thing that I would say from a communication perspective is just be okay with who you are, and finding yourself, and you have your own skills, and those are just natural or innate to you, or things that you want to work on. Just be yourself and be comfortable with it. Don't worry about what everyone else is doing. If you're focusing on yourself and being able to work through to be the best version of yourself, or what you want to be, not what you think other people want you to be, I think that'll lead you to a successful career, identifying what your values and what you need personally. And that's not from a selfish perspective. It's more of just being comfortable in your own skin, I think.
So I kind of touched on this a couple minutes ago, but I think, communication is not something that we're all experts at. Even people that are extremely good at communication have been practicing for decades and taking classes. And I think any advice I would give, and I've actually give symposiums on this, go out there and really self-assess yourself. What are you good at? What do you need to work on? Almost all of us could work more on how do we present ourselves? How do you give presentations? What's your writing skill? Can you improve on that? There's no such thing as a person that's an expert at all of those things from day one. So going out and trying to really focus on what do you need to improve on, and go take trainings, learn from other people on how you can improve on that. I know when I first started out, I was an absolutely terrible writer. I never really focused on it. My parents really didn't care. I came kind of from a blue collar industrial family that they didn't understand why I'd ever even go to college, let alone a PhD. So that just wasn't anything that was in my background or family structure. So I had to go out there and learn from people and find really excellent professors that would help me learn I have taken dozens of writing classes, dozens of how to present for poster presentations, symposia, quite a bit of different things over the years. And it did cost a lot of money, but you're investing in yourself. So I think the more you can kind of go out there and treat it as something you need to train yourself on, no different than a sport or anything else that you need to become an expert at, and just kind of keep building that skill set. That it pays off so well long term that anything you put into it, time, resources, you're going to get it back 100-fold. If you sit in your organization and you look at your senior leadership or the dean of a school or the chancellor of the school, they are exceptional speakers. There's a value and there's a reason why they got to there. If you're sitting in a hole and you can't talk to people, you're not going to get very far because people don't see the value in what you know because you're not telling them. You should be your biggest champion of yourself and also the biggest critic. So really, that's my biggest thing I've talked to people about over the years is, really build that skill set. And if you're not sure where to start, ACCP's got some symposiums that goes online. You could really use to start building that, and they're free too to people.
Just to refer to what Matthew said, even those level people that he cited, even those chancellors and brilliant speakers, believe me, they also critically reassess themselves. They watch their videos, they prepare. In my field, I know one of the most honored person who's given one of the best brilliant talks. In fact, we were in a hotel many times together traveling, and I know she will still, even at her stage of career, rehearse her presentation in her room, which sounds crazy for somebody who has multiple Nobel medicine papers. So people keep working on it throughout the career. It never stops.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with all of you, and it's really interesting to see as well, like that, ACCP, for example, has a lot of like the communication stuff, but many times, like you guys have mentioned, understanding your mentor, your leadership, and also knowing that the leadership you see this leadership, like Matthew has said, have a lot of like, they speak really well. These are 2 years of training, but many of like the younger generation, they feel like it's really not as crucial, or as someone myself, like for example, moving on from like the PhD, you see many students, so they're focused only on what they can present, and they think that's the most important thing, and they kind of neglect their communication. So what would you think, in just to wrap up also with the interest of time itself, just to see how do you find nowadays there's so many social media, we're using social media a lot, and also like online for like scientific interaction. What's your comment on it, and how do you think the style is different between like different generations as well? Using, right now we even have like hashtag for events and things like that. So yeah.
I'll kick this one off. So, in regards to social media from like a professional point of view, we're clinical pharmacology is kind of a small community, and there's some people who are really good at using social media, and I think the biggest point would be, if you decide that you want to create a professional profile, keep it professional. That's the one thing that millennials are good at in a way. Like if you look at influencers, they have they design a entire personality around their certain area that they're influencing. So I think you can take that and frame it into a professional perspective, that if you want to do that from a professional point of view, make sure that you're doing that as professional as possible. Don't mix the personal and the professional. And it's challenging. You have to be, it takes a lot of time too. You have to be good at it and invest the appropriate amount of time into it. I've seen ways people are doing it is you can, for example, on Twitter, if a new article comes out, you post about that article, and then have a thread where you're putting your comments about your interpretation or what the findings of the article were. I think that, that provides some value. And if you're good at it and you can do it quickly, that's an area where you can make an impact.
Yeah, I would say I'm sure it's a generational thing, but I know a lot of people in my career space that have a lot of presence online. I don't personally. I don't have the time or desire to do it, which is even worse because my wife is actually a social media influencer. So it's probably like that's her career. I don't get it at all. How do you make a career? But she actually has like a real career on it. I'm like, no, I have no interest in it. You can do it. I'm just not into it. For my career, I'm more into the networking face-to-face, and I think that's served me really well over the years. I have yet to apply for a job. Everything that every position I've taken over the years, people have come to me, and kind of through my network that I know personally is where I've kind of found my positions and kind of made my way through life thus far. So that's the way I kind of have gone about it. I'm sure there's like a better way to do it. But it just doesn't fit my personality. I think it just depends on the person and where you want to spend your time and resources. And I just think like that's the beauty of being able to be in a field like clinical pharmacology. We all went to school at the same 10 or 12 schools around the world, or we know somebody, or we work with somebody at that school. You can get a hold of just about anybody in the industry, anybody in academia, because we all know each other in some way or form, or connected through very close people that you work with on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's the benefit of ACCP. You have that ability to go meet with people. Go to the annual meeting, you can meet with the vice president of most of these divisions. They're all approachable. They're super nice people. They'll be like, oh my God, I went to school with your professor back in the day, and they'll tell you a million stories about your professor. Use those resources, use those networks, that face-to-face, it's irreplaceable. I don't think that we're all functioning remotely and through email and social media nowadays, but I think there's a swing to it, and it's in an ebb and flow. Nothing's going to replace face-to-face interaction. That's unreplaceable in my mind. And that's just the way I've seen it play out through my career as well.
To keep us on time, I will be short. I'm like Matthew, I'm an older generation. I'm not that invested in social media. I do have some basic literacy because of my young mentees giving me one-on-one lessons, but I usually do not manage this. My only couple of words there is that do not get sunk into that too much. It's good to use it, but I think at some point it's just so much of it, and it can really consume your time. And so my advice is to use it wisely. Do not get sunk in it, because I think that's a danger, in my judgment, maybe I'm wrong, of your generation. There's so much information from here and there, it becomes harder to filter because you need to keep a focus on what you're achieving. And also do remember that the style on social media needs to be different from the style in the personal communication, what Nadia has talked about, and which I think will truly matter for career development. And I think that is important differentiation. How many mentees I have who write to me, hi, without the name, and I read this email, and I'm immediately, as an older generation, like, what, not even calling each other by name? But it's a style in the text, and many times people don't use to address each other by name, but it's a very personable thing in my judgment to do. So if I get an email from Mentee that says hi and then goes on, I like immediately feel that there is no dialogue between us, and it is a continued style of the text of hashtags or whatever. So my advice is to use it wisely. It's a great tool, but try to differentiate the style. Definitely do not use the same style of communication across emails, especially professional emails. And what Alexander talked about is very important. Your image on the social media is very important. It will always be with you. So as I mentioned with emails, to me, the signs of maturity is the ability to stop and think about what do you want to be represented like, but also balance your media time with professional time, which I think becomes more difficult as it enters our home. Matthew is right. In older days, we still worked at home, but we didn't have the whole milieu walk back home with us. And I was looking at my son growing up, and he never was without his peers. Even when they were not at the dinner table with us, they were on his iPhone with us. And he was with them. So it's a very different medium. So please find your boundaries, because it can be very good, but it can also be distraction on your time, and you need to focus on community more.
Yeah, thank you all. So with that being said, we're getting close to the end of our time together for this session. So first of all, I'd like to thank the panelists, Nutella, Matthew, and Alex, for able to join us and give us such great insight on effective communication. And of course, more importantly, for you guys out there who joined us, took an hour and a half of your time to join us for today's sessions. I hope that you can get some getaways or some important pointers for effective communication as well. And if you have any more further questions for any of our panelists, feel free to reach out to ACCP, and we can connect you as well after this session as well. So just some housekeeping announcement. Right after this at 2:30, I believe we have the podium presentation. So if you're able to, please join us to celebrate with some of the students and trainee abstract award winners. They'll be giving their presentation and also have their question and answers. So with that being said, thank you so much everyone for coming. And I hope you enjoyed your time today. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining, everybody. Thanks. Bye.
Matthew.
Has left the meeting.
Casey?
Has left the meeting.
Thank you, Krista.